YouTube channel. In today's video we're going to be looking at using the chartJS and gridJS JavaScript libraries in Python. And here's the interface we're going to try and build. One where we can, where the user can load data in a table on a chart and select different options from the drop-down menu. And just use some of the basic functionality that's available in the chartJS library. We're doing this with the Flask Python library, and we'll be using a Google Colab notebook and just demonstrating how you can set up a basic application with the graphing capabilities and a corresponding table with these JavaScript libraries in Flask, and just just showing some of the basic functionality. We're not even using a database for this application, and I'll get into what that means and some of the restrictions that come with that. Obviously, if you were dealing with a really large data set, that's not a route you want to go, but I plan to have subsequent videos where we build a similar application using a database. So to start with, I'm going to use Google Colab notebook, and if you haven't ever used Google Colab, you just search from google.com for a Colab notebook, and you can get started right away. So the reason I do that is so it's easily reproducible, with this easy to start with area. So you just need a Google account to sign in. So now I'm going to get started with my notebook. I already have some notes on here to guide me in what I'm going to do. To start with, we're going to get economic data for the, from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is JOLTS data. It's the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. It's estimates that are published from the statistical agency on the number of job openings in the U.S., the number of hires in the U.S., the number of quits, the number of layoffs and discharges each month. And like a lot of economic series, it's really useful to graph it. So the motivation here is we're going to go out to this website, and we're going to use all these different tables, these lookup tables. And this is the data table, but there's also lookup tables that correspond to that, like this one where we get information on the industry. But this is where the data is, and that series ID column kind of corresponds to it all. So that's going to be our base URL, where the website we just navigated to, and then we're going to have all these data frames that that read out to there, to get this data. But the main one will be the data DF, the one I'm writing right now. You can also get this same data through the Pandas data reader library. If people might be familiar with that, it's actually more intuitive than what I'm doing to use. But I can, by reading directly from their website, here I'm just pointing out that this is tab delimited. That's what that option is in the read CSV method in Pandas. And also I'm just printing out the data frame to give you a sense of this looks like, what we looked at on the website. And I'll do that periodically while I'm testing stuff to make sure I don't have a mistake. So yeah, now we're going to look at the lookup tables that come from the same base URL. And we're going to use them, as we develop this application. And I'm trying to name them in a way that corresponds to some relevant column name. Here you go. One of the things about the Jupyter Notebook, or with the version we're using here in Colab, is you can always look at your read CSV method and see all the different options you get here, which is quite useful. So this is what I'm reading in now, just a small lookup table, but we're going to want that some of the codes from there when we're building out the options in our drop down options for the user. So these lookup tables really become important further down the line with in building this application. And again, something similar here. I'm getting the industry information, and I'm getting the time period lookup table here. And again, it's useful to test some of these just as you go along. Sometimes since I'm doing several of these, I'm just gonna copy and paste to speed it up, so I'm not typing out the whole thing over and over again. Again, I named these data frames based on the relevant column or table name on their website. So there weren't names I necessarily came up with. It's based on the table I'm looking at on their website. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you can get all these data from using the Pandas data reader library, but I can get it all in one shot from the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, reading in these web-based text files. And so I think that's more useful for this application web building. If you know exactly the series you want, it's often easier just to use Pandas data reader, which is using FRED, the Federal Reserve Economic Database. And yeah, so here's an important lookup table, which has all the series codes, and the industry one we just wrote as well has the industry codes, and they, those corresponding codes will point us to the correct industry we want for the chart table combination. So now I'm going to do some merging to with the data DF and the series DF to get this series ID and all the extra details. And notice here I have to account for this long space on the end of the series ID. And I'm also going to merge it with the period DF, so I got the time frame. And talking of this white space, we need to remove some of it from the column names when you read it. I found generally when you read it in, it needs this extra little bit of processing just to get rid of all the white space in the column names. It could cause problems down the line, and it's just best to get it out get it out of there. And if there's any in any of the column names, this string replace will get rid of it. And sorry, the strip above performs a similar function. I've made a typo somewhere along the line. So yeah, that didn't exist. The traceback gave me a pretty obvious indication that was wrong. So I'm going to take a second here and just print this back out and see. I made a mistake with the white space. So I'm going to print I'm going to print the column names into a list, and that should give me a good sense of where the white space is. So I'm just going to copy that, and hopefully that should fix my second problem. It's always good to not edit this out of my video so you can see me troubleshooting things along the way that might be easily trip people up. So we're all set on this part now. So I also want to eliminate a few observations. Like there's a whole size class and state, as in US states, and size classes in the size of businesses. I want to eliminate those series because it would mean more drop-down menus, and I think we already have 4 or 5 in the sort of plan I have to develop this app. Also, getting rid of annual data, which it doesn't correspond with the graph I have in mind. So I'm getting rid of all of those in the data step of lines 24 and 25. Sorry, in the creating the data frame at lines 24 and 25. And now I'm just going to select the, for what I'm calling my final DF. I use some, to my mind, some bad practices here along the way where I've used the data DF as the name of the data frame object. Probably should have had a different name at different points in time. It makes things easier to troubleshoot. Yeah, generally it's not a good practice, but I just did it here for brevity's sake. But I'm making my final DF, my final data frame. I'm calling it final DF, and that's kind of my final product for the main data. The main place that the in-memory data is going to be. And I'm just making some lists that we're going to use at different points throughout the video to loop through industry names, and this is data element names. That's the whether it's job openings, hires, layoffs and discharges, total SEPs, etc. And here I'm going to make a list of 10 different colors that I'm going to use for our chart. Again, to make it easy to loop through. And I've multiplied it by 10. So what does that do? That changes the length of the list so that it repeats over and over again. And you get a list that instead of being a length 10 is 10 times 10, so length 100. So that's kind of the thinking of why I'm multiplying it by 10. And we'll have easy to use list to go to for our colors for the chart. We're going to make using the chartJS JavaScript library further down the line. So this will be the last thing we'll do in this section, and then we're sort of set up with all our boring administrative task of getting the data all set up. But this is fully reproducible, so you can run this section and you're all set to run it yourself. Of course, all the code is posted below in the comments. Sorry, in the description of this video. And I will put any updates to it in the comments. It looks like I have another typo. And there we go. So it ran fine. So cool. Now we're getting into the Flask setup. So I'll add another code section. Here, I'm just making two different folders that are very important for Flask. One is static that we're not actually going to use, but you would use it for like you wanted to maintain a local version of your .css files or .js libraries that you're importing from somewhere else. It's important to have this kind of handy. So I'm doing the if not os.path exists. It's kind of like doing an mkdir from the terminal. If not exists. So if this folder doesn't exist, make it. If it does, don't. So we're using the template library. We're going to be using that template library. We're using the template folder. So yeah, we're going to make these directories as needed. And this is kind of what they look like in the structure. Again, we're not really using this static one. It's something you could use, for your CSS files or any JavaScript libraries you are writing out to, but at least in this demonstration, we're not going to be needing that. So yeah, sorry, this should be it's a bit of a typo. We're talking about the template directory, and so this is where we're going to write out each of the pages that the application will load. And so we're going to get started on, first off, writing the header, which is going to include the navigation pane that the user will select drop-down menus from. So this is fairly standard HTML code. A lot of modern text editors will have this preloaded. I know I have. Or you can do this yourself, where you have a sort of baseline, some HTML starter code to get started. But I'm going to go through the whole thing, in this video. And in terms of indentation, it doesn't really matter in Python. It doesn't really matter in general, but I try and keep it consistent try and keep the style fairly consistent with the indentation, so that when you look at the source of the HTML, when you're actually on the page, you'll see appropriate indentation. Modern text editors will do this for you. This isn't going to happen because we're using Python Notebook and Jupyter Notebook. So I'm kind of doing it myself. And you can also use some websites will do this indentation for you if you just Google HTML formatter. It's pretty easy to to find some where you can just drop your HTML code in there and they'll format it for you. So there's just a very standard, just very standard formatting. If you're not sure what Bootstrap is, just check it out. W Free Schools have pretty good Bootstrap tutorials and websites. I'm just looking up these different CDNs for the where the URL is. So I can just copy them and put them in the script tag here. I actually have a bunch of them on my clipboard, so just go ahead and copy them all in. And these are the ones I'm going to be using. So you can just Google them all and get those addresses like I just showed you with the chartJS one. But yeah, Bootstrap is going to be mainly used for our formatting, but chartJS and gridJS are going to be our, the chart and table. So yeah, if you wanted to, you could put these in your static library. I didn't do that in this tutorial, but you could just save them locally if you wanted to. Maybe you have an internal facing application and you don't want to go out to to these websites. Maybe that's a reason you might want to do it. But that's the static library is there for that. I'm sorry, the static folder is there for that. If you want to use that, but we're not actually using it with this application now. Just writing out a bit of a title at the top of the page. So again, this is U.S. job openings and labor turnover survey application. So we're just like looking at the estimates for U.S. job openings and labor turnover over like the last 20 years, as long as it exists. I think from the year 2001 or to whenever. And also, this is this application right now may only run through July of 2022, but if you run it like a year from now, I'm reading in all the data and everything's built to run. It can be easily updated. So again, this is fully reproducible. There's a very small part where you have to get your own auth token for Ngrok when we deploy this application. It's free, and that will come up later. But other than that, this is fully reproducible. So you can just, get it from the link below on my GitHub page and run it. So I'm making a home button that I'm not actually going to use, but I got this placeholder in there. It's just an example of how you could redirect the page if you wanted to go somewhere like home. But yeah, I'm not actually going to be using it. It's just kind of a placeholder for now. But yeah, now I'm going to start a form, and I'm going to put in an action, which is quite important, to go to this location that I'm going to call Jolts Review, and I'm going to make sure, absolutely important here that I have the post method. So the user is going to be selecting something from this drop down, and it's going to be posted, and then we're going to use that information to redirect the page down the line. So hopefully you'll see that if you're familiar with the get and post methods. This won't be foreign to you. But if you're not familiar with them, it will kind of tie in nicely when we get to the end and we deploy, when we make the Flask app. So this is going to be the label for this first drop-down menu that I'm going to make. I'm actually going to hard code these two with the select tag. So yeah, here are my two hard-coded options. And again, this will get returned and we will use this information to redirect, based on what the user selects. And I'm just going to save myself some time by copying these, because I'm going to do 4 for the different drop downs that the user can use. And key to note is that we're going to use these names. The name equals DT. That will eventually, when we do Flask app, we're going to take that information that the user's posted, so the DT equals whatever option they've selected. And here I'm using Ginger templating for the first time. I'm doing a for loop, and I'm looping through this DE list we made, which has the different types of data elements, so job openings, hires, total separations. There's a couple more quits. I'm not trying to remember. I think there's 6 different options, but they'll go to that drop-down menu based on this list we made up here at line 30 in the first block of code, if you recall. And so that's a real useful way, to use. There's plenty of different ways you could do this, but it's a real useful way to do it with Ginger templating. So now the user is going to see the that full list that we made. Yeah, and so with some of these smaller ones, it's not really worth doing it. I'm just going to, instead of doing that for loop, as you saw with the NSA SA one, where there's 2 options, it's just not worth looping through for 2 options. Let's just write them out. So I'll just write these 2 out. There's a rate and level option, calling the category, the rates or the levels. But we're also going to need one for industry, which is going to be, again, based on an industry list. So yeah, we're using that end list object we built up top, which is just a list of the different industries. And it's quite extensive. I think it's a bit, somewhere around 20 odd different industries. Again, making sure our name is squared away. And so that's going to get used later on when we're doing this, using the post method to get this information to then spit out the correct graph and table to the user, or point the app will redirect to the correct graph and table that the user wants. So now we're just also going to add in a button for the user to execute what they want. So they will actually, post this, and then we're going to use that information to sort of redirect to what they selected. Just trying to make sure I close off all my divs. I've tried to indent here quite well. I would also recommend, so you don't get lost too much in some of the formatting, you could just Google an HTML formatter, or a lot of times when you're writing HTML, you can use your own text editor. I'm doing all this in Google Colab, but if you use like Atom or Sublime, if you're familiar with any of those, you'll format your HTML in an intuitive way, or you can just Google, an HTML formatter. There's several online where you just put your unformatted code in and it indents it in a logical way. Also, it can get a little tricky when you're doing stuff like Ginger templating, but I've tried to be fairly consistent with this one, just doing it. So yeah, there's my template, and that's what the HTML looks like for now. We're going to include this in all our, this will be included in all the pages that we write further down the line. So now in this next part, we're going to look at writing the pages that will be loaded by the user, where they're going to use this series list, this series ID. Remember, there's several, there's about 600 or so unique ones, and we're actually going to write out about 600 of these HTML files using this function that we're about to create. It will only take about 10 seconds to run. It's not the most efficient, it's certainly not the most efficient way to do it, but it's an easy way to sort of build a simple web application without anything but in-memory data. If you're looking at doing this for thousands of different options, you probably want a database. You do want a database. This is a good way to sort of get a feel for the chartJS, using chartJS with Flask and gridJS with Flask without getting too bogged down in the database realm. Again, I plan to do a subsequent video where we use a bigger data set and use proper database structures to build a web application using these same JavaScript libraries and Flask in Google Colab. But for now, we're just going to write out these templates, and they're going to get redirected to these templates. The user will get redirected to these templates to load up their selection. So again, it all hinges on this series ID, which will be generated based on what they posted using the post method from their drop-down selections in the navigation pane we just did above. But in this section, we're just writing out all the possible options they might select. So, I want the data element text generated from one of their generated from the series ID. I basically want to do everything coming from the series ID here, and I'm using this iLook to just get the first row of the data frame that's created based on what series ID we're using. So I'm just getting the industry text from the first row, and I'm getting the data element text from the first row. And then I'm just also, the start of the series ID code is either JTU or JTS. JTU is the non-seasonally adjusted, that's what NSA stands for, and the other one is seasonally adjusted. They're the only two options. So I can get that information just by doing this little if-else. And I'm going to create a year list, which is just a list. I'm using just a list of the unique years used in the data frame based on the series ID. So I'm just getting the unique values in that particular column. So I'm just making use of that pandas unique function. And then I'm going to use, I'm going to put all the estimates from the estimates column, every single one, into a list. Using the list method, or sorry, I'm using the to list method in pandas. And here I'm going to make some arguments that will go into the first part of the HTML file we're going to write for any particular series. And here again, I'm back to Ginger templating. I'm going to include the header.html that we made directly above. So that drop-down menu and header is always there for the user in all of these pages. And now I'm going to, inside the body tag, I'm going to put the rest of the page. And I tried to do some different things. I didn't necessarily have to do this where I'm going to put these arguments in a dictionary and then put them in into this first, what I'm calling part 0, this first part of the text here. But I just wanted to demonstrate some different ways to do things in this tutorial. So here I'm going to take these free arguments that are dependent on the series selection. So whether it's season essay, what the name of the industry, what the name of the data element is. The data element is job openings, hires, etc. Job openings or hires, or total separations, or quits. And the top arg2 is the industry text, which is like the name of the industry that the user selected. One I can think of is like manufacturing, or total non-farm is the one that's the total number of job openings in the United States. So I just wanted to do that. Also, I'm using the canvas tag here because this is going to be where our chart that we're going to make with the chartJS library goes. So the ID here is important, that it's going to be consistent with what we do when we write out some JavaScript here in a moment. So yeah, and I also just for the sake of it, I wanted to put in some comments in JavaScript. I also wanted to use const, let, and var differently. So so there's a var declaration, there's const, and you can sometimes use them interchangeably. It would be traditionally we'd always use var, but in modern JavaScript, people are starting to use let and const, and I tried to use the most appropriate ones. So for this one, the const months are used because they're never going to change. Those 13, that array of 13 items, it looks a lot like a Python list. They're not going to change. So I thought const was the most appropriate there. So again, I tried to use all three. I just used const for the first one. I also wanted to just put in a couple of JavaScript comments. Again, I didn't go overboard with the JavaScript. I tried to make it very simple for those who aren't that familiar with it. I'm just fixing my spacing here, so to try and keep it consistent. Anyway, so that's the first part. Now we're going to be looking at actually looping through the years to create some JavaScript arrays that are going to be used as the data for the charts and for not just for the charts, but also for the table we're going to make a little bit later. And obviously, before I do that, I'm just going to write out that what I'm calling part 0. Notice that I used the option W in the one where I first opened it. Now I'm going to be using A+, so I'm appending to the initial write. If I use W here, I'd be overwriting everything we did in HTML part 0. And this isn't necessarily the most efficient way to be doing this. You could do this in a more concise way, but I just wanted to show some different ways to write to an HTML file. And I tried to make use of looping through some lists where possible. I'm also, So here I'm actually going to be creating a JavaScript array, which is quite similar to a Python list. And I'm going to use the write lines for this part as I loop through. And when you do this, there's some different things to take account for. I'll need to make sure I get my S list in there, and it's going to go for 13. There's going to be 13 different items in the JavaScript array here, and they should correspond to those months that I made up in line 24. And I also want to make sure I use the new line operator, so I go to so this writes out neatly. And I will mention I also use the enumerate, sort of the built-in Python function enumerate for this, where I get again, like an ID, like a zero-based or zero-indexed number with each item in the list. So I'll make use of that, even though I didn't actually use the year in year list. But anyway, I find the built-in enumerate function pretty useful, and I'll generally use it instead of just looping through the list. I'll use that particular function. So here, very important, making var CTX, and it's very important that I get the same get element by ID as I made in my canvas ID equals name my canvas tag in HTML up in line 20. Very important they're the same, otherwise the chart obviously won't load. And here are some options that are specific to chartJS. Their website, it's open source, totally free to use. So you just go to their website and they have tons of examples. For this one, obviously, I'm using a line chart, and I have some specifications that are tailored towards what I wanted this app to sort of look like. And we'll sort of get into this. I'm going to write out this small part again. I'm going to call it HTML part 2. I'm going to append again to the HTML file this part. And then in the next part, we're going to look at some of the different options that we can use in chartJS. And we're going to make sure we read in the correct array for the data. Or we're going to loop through a number of different years and make sure we get the correct array for each line. So again, yeah, I tend to use the built-in enumerate function where possible, even if I'm not using the year ID, or in this, in this case, I call them, you call them whatever you want, the year ID and year. Even if I don't use one of them, I just tend to find it's often useful to use it instead of just looking through the list. Yeah, and the right lines method again is pretty useful, but you got to be a little bit cautious and always, in this context at least, make sure you use, make sure you get to a new line at the end. And that's also a useful tip if you're just writing out like a CSV file. I mean, I probably won't use the right lines method to write out a CSV file, but if you wanted to, or a .txt file, whatever, you're probably going to want to use. Make sure you get to the next line if you're writing out multiple lines or doing it in a loop for sure. Yeah. So again, I'm just going through some of these different options we're using for the chartJS library. You can really copy and paste whatever you want from their examples if you don't want to use a line chart, or you can toy around with some of the options I've used for doing different types of things. Yeah, and I'm also going to put in some logic because there's right now, as of right now, there's like 21 different years in this chart. I'm only going to want the user to see like 10 tops to start with, but they can select more if they want, or if they want to key in on a particular number of years, they can select that the way we've built the chart. But the part I'm going to do here in a moment will give them a sort of a default of 10, the most recent 10 years of being visible, but then they can select the others, and that'll be dependent on whether they can select that, and you might notice that when I demonstrate the app at the beginning of the video, and I will again at the end. Once we've gone through all this, the user will have that option to click, and that's just part of the default chartJS functionality. So it's actually quite useful, but I'm going to hide the lines on the older stuff, but of course the user can do as they please. So yeah, and also this fill false option, it fills up the area below the line. In our case, in the line charts, I don't think it's really appropriate for what we're looking at at all. So it's important to, I just put all these options in here. Not sure what the default is, but that's not useful for us. We don't want it to be filled. And yeah, here's what I'm doing. If you're in a year that's greater than it's older than the most recent 10 years, we're going to, hide that line as the default. And then, it's going to be an if-then-else situation where the other option will be, the most recent 10 years. It's going to be hidden as set to true, so the user sees that as their default. Go, and I've got the, yeah, switch that the other way around. Yeah, and I'll close this out. And now we'll close this out and we'll start thinking about part 4, where we're going to move on to the sort of table. Yeah, so closing off some things before we close off the script tag. So it's actually quite useful, and Jupyter Notebook, they'll keep the when I open any kind of a bracket, they'll have the closure of it too. So I just kind of put them below so I didn't forget about them. I'm using the center tag now, so I just center the table. There might be better ways to do it with Bootstrap, or if you're inclined to use your own CSS. I'm just going to use the center tag for now. Again, I've got the idea of the jolts table is what I'm going to call it. And so we want to make sure that's consistent with what we do in JavaScript. So we're going to make use of the, we're going to close this off, but then we're going to make use again of that JavaScript array, similar to what we did further up for the chart. Yeah, again, we're using the write-lines method, and sorry, we'll use the write-lines method for the next part where we loop through again. So yeah, we're using the concat method here in JavaScript. Again, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about that. It's just a useful way to sort of join two or more arrays to for use in this table that we're going to write. So now we'll get to the last part where we're going to use the gridJS library to make the table that's going to correspond to our chart. And there's several different JavaScript libraries you could use for this, but I think this is one of the easiest to use. And so it's just sort of a basic table. And I do use some, I do use some of the options are very customizable in terms of what I use for the background color, and the text alignment. you can change all that. Again, the gridJS library has a website with lots of examples that you can use. If you want to do some different things. I'm setting the column widths here to not be dynamic, so they're always going to be the same on each of these different pages. Pagination is sort of the option to click, to have it a default, to have it click over for, in our case, different years. So yeah, I think there'll be about 10 years to a page, and then you can click onto the next page for the next 10, and so on. Yeah, and we're just also setting up some different things for the borders, just some default styling here. In general, we're just looking here at the style for the equivalent of the th tag in HTML, which is the table header, like the table header element, and TD would be the sort of the data cell, the row across the so the data cell element in HTML, and we're going to format them appropriately here. So yeah, this is just I'm just giving it the plain white color. Define again. I put these in here so you can toy around with them if you wanted to do something, but I also think having the nice border around the table is a good idea. How I have set it up here, and I'm going to make the bottom consistent with that other border. And I'm also just, again, you don't necessarily have to put all these options in here, and if you don't want your text alignment to be centered, you can play around with it for whatever you're going to use this for yourself. So yeah, so that was just for the header, and just like in with the HTML, I did the th tag. Now again, like I mentioned, I'm doing the td tag just to make the text alignment consistent with what I did for the headers. I'm going to center it again. Again, you don't have to use these options. You can do what you choose to. And now I'm going to have to render document element by ID. Sorry, get element by ID, which should correspond with the ID I made in the div tag above, which was jobs table. So you want to make sure those match, so that matches the div tag I wrote further up right there. So again, I made it simple. This was the job openings and labor turnover survey, which is jobs, and I made it table and chart. So jobs chart was the for the canvas ID tag where I put the chart in, and then this one is jobs table. So a meaningful name, I think, is always best, related to what you're doing. And I'll close up the script tag. And the body tag to finish this off. And then I'm doing this business again where I open the HTML file, append to what's already in there, and then close it. Again, there are other ways to do a lot of what I've done here, but for this example, I think it's pretty transparent and an easy place to start, even if you don't have a massive amount of experience with it. We're not doing much HTML or JavaScript. It's very basic stuff and really using a lot of the default things that are in the gridJS library or the chartJS library. So cool, yeah. So you can see we've gone through quite a few different things, including making the chart and the table. And we're going to have to write this out now for each. If you remember our user-defined function up the top, we're going to have to write this out for each of the series. So if you recall, we made a series list, which had all the series. I think there's around about 600 different combinations. And now we're going to loop through this and write out an HTML file for each one of those. So for series in, series list, I mean, you can call the series bit whatever you want, but I'm just calling it series. But we want to loop through that series list. And now we're just going to use that write HTML user-defined function we made and write out the series for each of those lists that corresponds to the series ID, which was the only parameter I put to that function. So you don't necessarily need that series ID in there, but I think it's useful always to put it in there so everyone can follow along, especially if you have multiple parameters to your user-defined function. So, I'm just making use of the runtime button and run all. Got an error in there. Yep, I had a typo. You can see it said IO operation, input output operation on a closed file, HTML part 3 dot write lines. I think I was meant to be doing something else, HTML part 5 maybe. Yeah. So I need to quickly change that and that. Yeah, so sometimes the danger when you're doing this a little bit quickly. Oh, and sorry, the bit right below it. Yep. So I'm going to change that too. Okay. Maybe we don't have another error. So it would probably take like, I don't know, 10-15 seconds to run. So cool, yeah, there it is, 11 seconds. So it's a decent amount of time, as you can see. If I'm doing 600 different templates here in this directory. Yeah, so all of these are coming out. It's quite a lot. It took 11 seconds. You can see if you're talking in the thousands, you really want to be probably using a database to do this in a way where it's reading, it's doing a get post method to actually read the data as you go along. It's probably a better way to go, but for a very simple app that's limited in scope, this isn't a bad starting point. So yeah, and again, you can click on the HTML file, see all that we did, like where we looped through the arrays. You can see I've got those 21 arrays for the different years, nicely set up in the file we're opening, the .html file. And you can see here's the chart, and again, all our loops where we did write lines for 21 times. You can see our different data that we needed here for the arrays. And yeah, all that info in HTML part 3.writeLines. We wrote it, we looped through, so it went there 21 different times. Again, if you'll notice, we did an if then else for whether we would hide the line. So 2014 forward, you can see hidden is false. Before that, it's true. So by default, the user gets the 10 most recent lines appearing when they load up their selected chart. And again, here's another loop we did with the writelines method. Again, the indentation is actually not perfect, but it's fine. We definitely having the new line. Going to a new line makes it very readable. At the same time, just looking at the JavaScript and HTML. Cool. So now it's time for us to move on to the Ngrok setup. So with Ngrok, this is the only part you're going to have to make a change to the baseline code that I put, which is what I've used in this tutorial and what I'm putting in the comments below. So instead of typing out, I might just copy and paste what I have. But first, I'm going to go out to the Ngrok website and just show you where you sign up for an auth token. Totally free, but you need to sign up for one. It's pretty user-friendly. Basically, you give them your email address. You have this auth token, which is good. And I've already set up the account myself. And here's what it will look like. So I just copied and pasted this code. It's in the it's on GitHub, and it's linked below. So you just run these 3 lines, and then below your auth token. That's not my auth token. That's just a random bunch of That's not actually my auth token, so it won't work. You have to put yours in. Line 6. That's the only change you have to make to this entire Jupyter notebook, and for it to run. So running it will take a second, and then you're all set. Okay. I won't tell you if you don't have a valid auth token, at least until you try to go through Ngrok when you're setting up deploying the web application to Ngrok. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to jump right into actually using Flask. So I think we're over an hour in, and we're now going to finally use Flask. And of course, we've got to use Flask Ngrok. It's a nice little library where you can just run with Ngrok. It makes it very easy to use Ngrok. We're going to import Flask, render template. We're going to render all those templates that we made. And also we're going to use request because we're going to be doing a post method to get what the user selects on the drop-down menu we made earlier. I was going to do import OS because I often use it to, in these sort of applications to get username, but it's not really necessary. So I'm just going to leave that bit out. All right, so let's get rolling. This you'll see at the start of any Flask app equals Flask _name, and then run with Ngrok app. That's just for Flask Ngrok library. So, and then this is how we'll navigate to a page, and this is going to be our landing page, which I'm just going to put the header, if you remember, that we made. So yeah, so again, I have to make a user-defined function. And I'm going to use the render template method here to load the header.html. You have to put some parameters in there, like I need to get them the data element list. If you remember, our Ginger template uses that list to make to make a couple of the options, and the end list, same deal. Yeah, now I'm all set up to actually load this for the first time, and I'm going to use this 2 lines of code here to get all set up to actually run the app for the first time. So now I'll wait for the Ngrok page, and I'll head out there and just click for this to visit site. And you can see I've got my header all set up for the user. I've got the 2 long lists set up in the options for the drop downs, and you know, all the 2 hard-coded ones are made, but the button doesn't work yet because we haven't added the next bit. So well, we have the header all set up, and now we'll get on to adding another route that we can navigate to from that menu, from the navigation bar. So I'm going to call this route JOLTS review, so, as in the user can review JOLTS data in the graphs and tables. And so this is where we're really, you know, making use of the post method to get what the user is selecting out of those options when they click the load button. So important for the next 4 things, I'm using the names that we assigned earlier when we were writing out the header. I'm going to use use request.form.get to get these names that were selected by the user. And if you remember, like in the select tag in HTML, we assign the name, ET, DT, cat, and N for those 4 different select tags. And using the form control class so that the user can select those, and these will get sent by the post method, and then we can determine which page we're going to navigate to, as in to which of our templates that we made earlier based on the user selection. So now we've got that user selection. We're just going to make we're going to write a really long one-liner to make sure we get the first 6 digits correct. Well, they're not the first 6 digits, but the industry digits correct. They're 6 digits, and some of them can begin with 0, so there's a little bit of wonky stuff here where we're doing a Z fill 6 and making it a string. I'm padding the numeric string because some of them begin with you see the first 6 zeros, some of them don't, but you can easily lose the zeros if you're not careful. So it ends up being a really long one-liner. You could break it up more, but I'm just going to put it in one line for now because chances are if you're repurposing this for your own stuff, you're not going to need to do something quite this involved. You know, it just really depends on your data. But for this, it was the only way I could figure out to make it work. Again, I could have broken this up into a couple of lines, so it's not so quite this ridiculous. But anyway. So yeah, again, I'm making use of making use of the as type the as type method. Sorry for pandas to make sure I get it right, get this industry code correct, and then getting based on the user selection that string, and then because I didn't, the next two numbers are the state, and we just are using not state data, so we're just going to add. This is going to be the default 00, and then now we're looking at the data type selection. Again, it's a little bit wonky. We're going to get the it's going to be based on what the user selected for DT. We're going to take that and we're matching it up with the data element DF that we made sort of a lookup table back at the beginning, and making sure our DT selection matches that. And for size selection, just like the state, I tried to make this a bit more simple and just go with the default there. Same with the area selection, which is like the metropolitan statistical area, so it could be like a different location. Again, try to keep it simple. And now I'm going to try and construct the whole series from all of these, and just making use of the ability. You can do this with Python syntax, where you just add one string to another. I'm just going to make use of that to try and keep it fairly transparent. And so I'll try and keep them in order, in the order that the correct order. And I'll need one for category 2. So cat selection. So that was the cat entry up there. And I'm just going to take the first letter of that and make it uppercase. And again, I'm just going to fix them so they're in perfect order, the order that they're going to be written. So, so now we got that set up. I'm going to make a data frame that corresponds to the user inputs, and just going to, it's good practice, I think, although I'm not great at doing it in this tutorial, but just put some notes in there, at least for the function, to just talk about what you're doing. Anyway, so yeah, let's make a data frame based on, now we have that series. Let's just go ahead. Now we've got that series selection. We can just go ahead and navigate to the page we want based on series selection. And then we're just going to have to pass a few more different things, like the industry text, the data element text, which the user selected, whether it's NSA or SA data. which again the user selected. Calling this one the data type text. And that's the category that they selected, whether it was levels or rates. And the data element list, I'm also going to pass, which and the end list, because we need those for the options and the navigation, in the nav bar. We're all set to run this now, and we'll jump out to the Ngrok tunnel to look at what it looks like. So yeah, same as before, but we should be able to select some options now. Other separations, levels, some kind of industry here, manufacturing, and load data, and there's our graph. And so you can see we've got the default years in the graph, and down here we've got the table. We can navigate to other years in the table just with that pagination option we talked about in gridJS. I can unselect or select different years if I want to. Get away from these more recent years and perhaps go to some older years, depending on what the user wants to do. They have that option, but I think it was important to hide some of the years on the initial view just because there's a lot of years, right? So yeah, basically we're done. So we have this. It's not too painful. There's definitely more efficient ways to do it, and in a subsequent video I'm going to look at doing this with a database, so you're actually calling the data rather than writing out 600 odd templates, although as you saw it was fairly quick and not too troublesome to do that.